Hey there, this is Mr. Icarus, and welcome to yet another edition of Mod Madness. This time around, we're checking out a mod for Quake by the name of Quake 1.5, and as the name implies, this is a mod that seeks to bring a few, let's say, modern contrivances to the original Quake, be it in the visuals, the gameplay, or the gore. Many of you will have also noticed that the weaponry here is no longer centrally aligned, solving the issue of how the protagonist manages to absorb all of that recoil directly into his crotch. You can also kick people, which is a rather satisfying move to use as a finisher, be it kicking them into lava, into rivers, or just into a wall. Another offensive technique that you have access to here in Quake 1.5 is the ability to throw grenades. These are not your traditional type of grenade. They don't detonate after a set number of seconds. They are instead proximity based, meaning that the enemy does need to pass reasonably close enough for them to trigger. And you've got to be careful with this, because that also means you could inadvertently trigger a previously placed grenade, but if you chuck it right, chances are you'll be rewarded with a rather pleasing gore-splosion. It's difficult to talk about Quake 1.5 for very long before you get to the subject of just how goddamn nice everything looks, and the truth of that is that the responsibility for all of this resplendent gloominess actually lands at the feet of another mod, in which 1.5 actually runs in parallel with. Somewhat fittingly, it's a mod called Dark Places, which adds all of the shadow and lighting effects, as well as a fair number of HD texture replacements. When you really get down to it, the core of Quake 1.5 isn't defined by any one mod in particular, rather it's a cocktail of mods that come together to form this rather glorious end result. That said, as with changes such as the ability to kick enemies and throw grenades, there are a number of changes in effect within 1.5 that go beyond the realm of the cosmetic. You may have noticed, if you're particularly eagle-eyed, that there's not just the regular variety of enemies here. There's a few new additions, some of them recognizable from the likes of Arcane Dimensions. You'll find that changes also extend to that of the level layouts themselves, and while it's not particularly overt, things will seem largely familiar at first glance, you'll discover here and there that there's a few little, let's say, embellishments to how things usually go. On the more overt side of things, you'll find that some of the embellishments here in Quake 1.5 actually include the insertion of entire wholesale levels, largely with the intent of providing a bit more of a, let's say, climactic nature to the end of certain episodes. If you're familiar with Quake in its vanilla form, you'll know that after the end of the first episode, the concept of boss encounters kind of just dries up and disappears. Here, that is very much rectified, and as you can see with the end of episode 2 here, spoilers by the way, picking up the rune isn't just a consequence of getting to the end of a level. It does in fact form the trigger for a boss fight, and I'm very happy for this kind of addition, because I feel like Quake, as great as it is, was missing that certain something, that sense of pride in accomplishment from taking out a big bad at the end of an episode. That said, I do feel that these boss encounters could stand to be much more challenging than they currently are, because as neat as it is to have an honest-to-God bona fide boss battle at the end of an episode, I can't help but feel that the enemies themselves just go down far too easily. That's the boss done, by the way. I thought it was charging up a special attack at first, or maybe transitioning to a second phase of the fight, but no, that's it done. And you just gotta mop up the rest of those stone statues that come to life. And yeah, I feel that the bosses here could stand to be a heck of a lot beefier, and that goes for both the episode 2 boss and the episode 3 boss. With that in mind, I'm still very grateful to have this additional bit of pomp and circumstance to make the act of acquiring these runes feel a little bit more momentous. For those of you out there that enjoy tracking down the occasional secret level during your playthrough of Quake, you'll be surprised to learn that there are a few new additions in this category too, and this one right here, a level called Maximum Speed, is quite possibly one of my favorite examples. It's just neat. I love it. I just love the concept. I love the fact that it's a speeding train. I like just the simplicity and straightforwardness of it. It's short, it's sweet, you're gonna die a whole bunch because certain enemies can throw grenades at you and stick you with them, and I hate them. And that said, I didn't feel annoyed at having to play through the level a fair few times before I, cracked it. I think part of that is down to the fact that if you do die, it just means you have another opportunity to kick someone off a train, which is, always fun. Oh yeah, the slow-mo, that's something as well. Quake 1.5 every now and again will decide, you know what, that thing you just killed, you did it in a very stylish and gory fashion. We're just gonna turn down the speed a little so you can appreciate all of those giblets just careening through the air. It's a nice little moment to experience. It doesn't do it too often. It could get potentially irritating and interrupt the flow of gameplay if it did it on a overwhelmingly frequent basis, but no, it's very, very restrained when it comes to the introduction of those little flourishes, let's say. When it comes to the subject of weaponry here in Quake 1.5, I'm afraid that I've not got as much to say about it as you'd probably like me to, and that largely comes down to the fact that I'm nowhere near as experienced with Quake as I am with the likes of Doom. But regardless, with what experience I have, I was hard-pressed to find much of a significant difference between how the weaponry works here in 1.5 and how they operate in vanilla. I'd say the only significant change really is the look of the weapons themselves, and that extends more to a fresh coat of paint rather than any serious reimagining of what the weapon is supposed to look like. I think the only thing that kind of caught me off guard was actually the super nail gun here. I wasn't used to seeing the entirety of the weapon, just the ends of the barrel, so at first I actually kind of confused it with the Hyper Blaster from Quake 2. But if we're going to get down to brass tacks, that largely seems to be the intent, to bring a little bit of that design philosophy from Quake 2 and infuse some of it into Quake 1. And in terms of how successful that is, I like what I see. No complaints. On top of the traditional roster, there are in fact a few new additions here, but they're kind of rare. They're pretty tricky to come by during the course of the standard levels unless you're very diligent with either secret hunting or killing enemies in a very specific fashion. But the laser cannon, good grief, does that thing tear through shamblers. I mean, the sheer firepower coming out of this thing could make any encounter just feel utterly trivial, which is why having it be a rare pickup makes all the more sense to me. The other weapon that's available in the roster in 1.5 is much more low-key in comparison to the laser cannon. It's in fact the chainsaw, particularly the one that the ogres wield, and if you kill them in a particular fashion, you'll be able to pick it up and use it for yourself. It's essentially just another option for you to use should you be in close quarters with certain enemies, so if you get a little bored of using the axe and you've got access to it, you've got a chainsaw. When it comes down to it though, it doesn't feel like Quake 1.5 is a mod that's all that overly concerned with reinventing the wheel. Rather, it takes the wheel as it currently is, considers it, and thinks, you know what would make this more fun? A little bit of bling, maybe some spinning rims, maybe a few LEDs in there somewhere, maybe a little bit more grease for the axle, because it's not really fundamentally changing the way that you're going to be playing Quake here, but it does make it really damn enjoyable to go back through and experience it from front to back, and that is exactly what I did with this mod. As I said earlier on in this video, it really is a collection of things that come together to create something that's got a lot of really neat touches and flourishes. I mean, for one, I love the death animations that certain enemies have depending on the weapon that you're using. In particular, the death animation of the ogre when you shoot it with a face full of nail gun rounds. Just that slow falling down flat on its face animation kills me every time. It's great. I'm also a fan of the use of enemy variant types. Keeps things interesting. Sometimes you'll be up against a stronger version of what you'd normally encounter, and it seems to be an element that's slightly randomized, if I'm not mistaken. It seems to change depending on the quick load. And there's also changes to enemy behavior, particularly that of the Vor, which I can't decide whether I'm a fan of or whether I'd just rather never have to see another Vor ever again in my life. In this case, 1.5 allows Vors to stick themselves to the ceiling, and also occasionally spawn these little mini-vores that will endlessly bite at your ankles. So on one hand, it's a really cool touch. On the other hand, thanks, you've just made the vor more irritating for me to deal with. So yeah, I'm a little conflicted on that one. In terms of things that I would like to see in future editions of Quake 1.5, it would be the wholesale eradication of these blue jumping jackasses. I hate them. They're annoying. Everyone knows they're annoying. For the love of God, change it, fix it, remove it. I don't care what you do as long as it isn't what it currently is. Holy shit, I hate those enemies. Oh, and while I'm at it, I'm going to bitch about the enforcers as well, because they can stick you with proximity grenades. Can you do anything about this once it's happened? Not really, but I think it would be pretty nifty if you could throw those grenades back at them, rather than, you know, just having to accept death. So yeah, turns out I quite enjoyed my time with Quake 1.5. It's a real nice excuse just to go back and, as I said, experience Quake front to back. There's neat little surprises and touches nestled away in here that will frequently have you going, that's pretty neat. And crucially, it manages to pull all of this off without compromising what makes Quake feel like Quake. But that's just me, and as I said earlier, I am relatively inexperienced when it comes to Quake in comparison to Doom. But at the very least, it was certainly enjoyable. I certainly didn't plan on sitting down and playing through all of Quake all over again with 1.5, but there was something about it that made that process rather enjoyable. At the very least, I hope you managed to experience the same level of enjoyment yourselves, and to that end, if you're thinking about giving it a spin for yourself, you'll find the link, as usual, in the description below. While I'm at it, I'd like to give a great big thank you to my wonderful patrons over on Patreon. Thank you so very much for supporting the channel and for helping to make content like this possible. If you're interested in lending a hand yourself, maybe you'd like to see your name in the credits, maybe you'd like to get your hands on an early edition of my video before anyone else gets a chance to see it, well, in that case, you'll find the link to my Patreon page also in the description below. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Feel free to let me know what you thought in the comments, and feel free to suggest any mod you'd like to see me cover in future editions of Mod Madness. I'm just going to let the implication of what's happening on screen sink in for a moment. Yeah. A lot of you are going to want to play this now, aren't you? In any case, this has been Mr. Icarus. Thank you very much for watching. Icarus out.